High above the Pacific in early 1943, Japanese naval pilots believed they ruled the skies. For years, their Mitsubishi Zero had been untouchable, a machine that seemed lighter, faster, and more agile than anything the Allies could field. These men carried not only skill, but the weight of a philosophy that spirit and discipline would always triumph over brute force and technology. Then, on a February morning over the Solomon Islands, they met a machine that shattered both their confidence and their doctrine. From below, a dark blue fighter rose sharply, its inverted gull wings slicing the clouds. It didn't level off. It kept climbing past 20,000 feet, past the limit where the Zero faltered. When the Japanese tried to follow, their aircraft stalled, trembling on the edge of its performance. And then the new fighter turned, dove, and screamed past them in a blur, its 6 machine guns blazing. The sound it made in that dive, a high-pitched whistle from its wing root oil coolers, was so distinct, so chilling, that soon Japanese pilots would hear it in their sleep. This was the F4U Corsair, and its arrival changed everything. The first encounters with the Corsair were confusing for Japanese pilots. At first glance, the plane looked almost ungainly, long nose, wide propeller, wings bent in strange fashion. They assumed it was another clumsy attempt by the Americans to match the sleek Zero. But when combat began, that illusion collapsed instantly. The Corsair could reach speeds over 400 miles per hour, nearly 70 faster than the Zero. It could dive beyond 500 miles per hour without losing control, while the Japanese fighters shook apart if they pushed too hard. Even climbing was no longer an advantage for Japan. The Pratt & Whitney engine inside the Corsair roared with nearly twice the horsepower of the Zero's fragile motor. Within minutes of engagement, Japanese aviators discovered the impossible truth. Their cherished aircraft could not outturn, could not outclimb, and could not outrun this bent-wing monster. What once was a duel between men now felt like survival against a predator. American pilots, protected by armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, could afford mistakes. Japanese pilots could not. Every maneuver became a gamble with death. Slowly, terror replaced confidence. The hunter had become the hunted, and the battlefield skies no longer belonged to them. By late 1943, the Corsair wasn't just a new fighter, it was a psychological weapon. Squadrons like Major Gregory, Pappy, Boyington's Black Sheep used its strengths with ruthless efficiency. They refused to be drawn into turning duels. Instead, they climbed higher, dove faster, struck with brutal firepower, and vanished before the Japanese could even react. The 6 heavy Browning machine guns ripped through Zero formations, shredding fragile airframes that carried little armor. Survivors described the experience as hopeless, like boxing with bare fists against a man in steel gloves. Worse still was the sound. The Corsair's whistle, created by air rushing through its intakes, became so infamous that Japanese pilots began associating it with death itself. Some Americans even performed mock terror dives over enemy airfields, firing nothing just to sow panic. Veteran Japanese aviators who once preached Bushido, the code of fearless spirit, found themselves counseling retreat when Corsairs appeared. And the new recruits, with barely 100 hours of training, had no chance at all. To them, the sky became a place of dread. It was no longer about honor or tradition. The arrival of the Corsair had turned air combat into a one-sided execution. The deeper the war dragged on, the more the Corsair exposed the fragility of Japan's air strategy. Pre-war training had forged elite pilots with thousands of flight hours, men who truly believed skill alone could conquer machines. But by 1944, fuel shortages and relentless losses reduced new graduates to barely 50 hours in the cockpit. They were sent against Americans who had already practiced high-altitude dives and gunnery in hundreds of training missions. Facing the Corsair, these rookies were slaughtered before they even fired a shot. Even Japan's best aces admitted that fighting the new fighter was suicide. Saburo Sakai, one of the most celebrated survivors, later wrote that the only tactic was to run not for shame, but because survival was otherwise impossible. The Corsair didn't just win battles, it dismantled an entire military philosophy. The belief that courage and discipline could outweigh industrial strength collapsed in midair with every encounter. America's factories produced more Corsairs in a single month than Japan could build fighters of all types. Each new arrival was a reminder that this was no longer a contest of equals. It was industrial might crushing warrior tradition, and the outcome had already been decided. By the time the war neared its end, the Corsair had become a symbol of inevitability. Over Okinawa, they flew thousands of missions, sweeping the skies clean and striking ships, airfields, and supply lines with bombs and rockets. Japanese pilots, many still in their teens, faced them with outdated machines and almost no preparation. Most never even saw their attackers. A shadow above, a whistle in the air, then sudden fire tearing through fragile wings, and it was over. The fear was so profound that entire squadrons sometimes refused to take off when reports of Corsairs nearby reached the ground. For the Americans, victory was no longer a question of if, but how fast. To their opponents, the Corsair was not merely an aircraft. It was the embodiment of an industrial giant, a reminder that courage meant nothing against overwhelming production and technology. In post-war years, Japanese survivors recalled the moment they realized the truth. Their skill, their traditions, their sacrifices had been rendered powerless by machines built in numbers they could never match. The bent-wing fighter had not just won air battles. It had broken a nation's faith in its own invincibility, leaving only silence in the skies.